Miranda walked up to the 9th floor. It was the 7th year she had lived in this house, and in all that time the management company had never bothered to fix the elevator. But she did not dare to resent it. She got the apartment for free, as the girl was an orphan. And in general, all her life she was taught to tolerate. Being insulted by her elders. Be patient with soup, salted peppers. Be patient. And the teacher scolded her to be patient. She had nowhere to find support. No one told her that she could and should stand up for her rights. The other tenants didn't try to influence the situation either. The management company said they would fix the elevator, so they did. It does not matter that more than 5 years have passed since the moment of appeal. All of them were accustomed to wait and endure every day, either morning or evening, depended on the shift at the hospital. Miranda used to go to Kelly on the 1st floor to give her an injection. She was the favorite of all the grandmothers in that 9-story building because she worked as a nurse. As soon as one grandmother saw a girl in the hospital, she immediately told all her friends on the bench about it. Miranda could not refuse the poor women, even did not take payment from them. But the neighbors paid her in their own way. Some gave her knitted socks for the winter, some gave her pies and pancakes. Her hands were shaking, and Miranda could hardly get the key into her door lock. The girl wanted to open the door, enter the apartment, and hide from everyone. Today was her birthday, her 25th birthday. But Miranda hated this holiday. That's why her hands were shaking, and she wanted to hide behind the door of her empty apartment as soon as possible. The reason for this hatred wasn't because she had no one to celebrate her birthday with, and not even in the fact that only one nurse remembered her birthday and congratulated her. The rest of the colleagues somehow missed it. No, Miranda loved this day until she was 10. She waited for it almost all year long, but the 10th birthday turned out to be a tragedy. The girl received a lot of congratulations from classmates, some even gave gifts. Miranda changed clothes, magnitudes, shoes, and anticipation of the continuation of the holiday. She and her mom lived poorly, but they always arranged a special day for the girl's birthday, with a trip to an amusement park and a cake. Her mom would start saving money months in advance to give her daughter the brightest day of the year. Miranda had already put on a light jacket and was heading for the exit when Christina called her. "Where are we going to put her now?" Christina asked her colleague as the girl walked towards them. "I don't know. The police said to keep her at school for now." "While they are looking for relatives," Kathy answered in a whisper. "And I know she doesn't have any other relatives." Her mother grew up in an orphanage herself. Christina and Kathy worked at the school as social workers. Miranda knew this, so she was very frightened when the woman beckoned to her. Every student at the school understood that the social pedagogue and psychologist only interacted with bad students and put them on the register. Suddenly, they found out that yesterday I got a D, Miranda thought to herself. And the teachers were 2 steps away. Now they will put me on the register, and I will never enter the institute. The girl approached me and stopped with shaking legs. She approached Christina because she was a psychologist. Miranda was less afraid of her than Kathy, who only dreamed of turning in all the students to the police. That was the opinion of all the students in the school. The women didn't scold Miranda for a D, not even for calling nasty Yulka a bad word a few days ago. They didn't know either. Christina, on the contrary, very affectionately invited Miranda to go to her office. There she immediately put the kettle on and gave the girl some candy. Both Kathy and Christina were very nervous, but Miranda did not notice it. She only tried to understand why these women looked as if they were paying the price. That day, the girl's mother was hit by a car. The unfortunate girl was not even able to get to the hospital. She died in the ambulance on the way. Miranda was sent from the psychologist's office to the police, and from there she went to the shelter. Miranda didn't get a cake or a present that day, but for the rest of her life, there were terrible memories. Every year on that day, she had her own scream in her ears, which struck the whole orphanage. Miranda screamed in fear and terror when she was told that her mom would not pick her up from the orphanage that evening, and she would not pick her up the next day. Not even a week and a month later would Miranda be able to see her mom. It's been 15 years now, but memories like that can't be expunged from her mind. Well, there's no statute of limitations, and time doesn't heal. Miranda has always remembered that she is alone in this world. She has no one except for the grandmothers she gave injections and IVs to for tea cakes. Miranda sat in the hallway for half an hour, leaning against the door. She hadn't even taken off her shoes. What she was wearing, she slid down the wooden surface and leaned against it. Across from her stood the cake Kelly had given her. "We need to create at least the semblance of a celebration," Miranda told herself. The girl wiped her tears and stretched her legs out in front of her. She cringed and got up from the floor. Taking the cake with her, Miranda went to the kitchen. While the kettle boiled, the girl looked for candles. She remembered exactly that she had a pack left over from last year. Then the old ladies decided, with their whole squad, to come to visit her. They brought candles. Miranda was getting angry. She had already closed all the drawers, but the stupid package with the colorful little candles was nowhere to be found. Not much to go on, Miranda got angry and slammed the cabinet shut with all her might. Right on top of her head fell the very same package. All the candles fell out of it and scattered all over the floor. Among the waxy debris, Miranda found 5 pieces. She quickly inserted them into the dessert, setting them on fire. Huh! The girl made eye contact and made a wish. She dreamed of only one thing to get rid of her loneliness. This dream accompanied Miranda almost all her life. At school, the girl had friends, but after she got to the orphanage, of course, communication stopped. In the orphanage, Orphan could no longer make friends with anyone. They didn't like newcomers there. They didn't like anyone there at all. Miranda dreamed of becoming a doctor. All she did was read biology and chemistry textbooks. But the teachers at the orphanage did not worry about the fate of their graduates. No one sought to put more knowledge into their heads. The girl could not independently prepare for the exams. She did not enter the institute. Miranda did not despair as she gave her documents to the medical college. The girl decided that working as a nurse is a great alternative. She would also help people communicate with the sick, even if it was not exactly what she dreamed of. The next day, Miranda woke up, as usual, half an hour before her alarm clock. It was unclear where she got this habit from, but she realized that it was useless to fight it. The girl leisurely gathered herself and left the house. Her mood was even sadder than usual. Every time after a holiday, a feeling of desolation sets in, even if there was no celebration as such. Nothing interesting happened at the hospital until lunchtime. The usual routine of rounds, IVs, shots, pills. "It was your birthday yesterday." "Sorry, slipped my mind," said Miranda Lisa. The second nurse on Lisa's unit was the person Miranda interacted with the most in the hospital. They were almost the same age. Lisa was only 1 year younger than her partner, but she already had a spouse and even a child. Miranda was a little jealous of her, but it was a light envy. Although she couldn't listen to the stories about Lisa's son's teeth coming in, his first steps, and so on. It was nothing. I haven't reminded anyone of it myself. "I don't like this day," Miranda replied. She wanted to change the subject, or better yet, to leave the conversation altogether. "But I love my birthday. Liam gave me a ring like this last time." Lisa immersed herself in her pleasant memories and leaned on the reception desk and poked her cheek with her fist. "But do you remember I showed you one with a diamond?" "I don't remember," Miranda lied. It was impossible to forget the way Lisa had walked around for a week with that ring and poked everyone in the nose with it to make sure they noticed. But then she stopped wearing it, citing that she was afraid of losing it. Miranda shifted from foot to foot and tried to think of something to do to get rid of the bailiff whose scrolls this were. But their conversation was interrupted by a deafening scream that echoed throughout the hallway. The hospital immediately began to move. Patients began to peer out of their rooms. Orderlies and nurses scurried about. Even the head doctor was already coming down from the second floor. "What's going on?" Mason asked the guard. A man came in. I didn't want to let him in, but he ran, then fell. The guard began to answer confusedly. "The man has an acute condition." "What are we talking about?" "He needs to be examined immediately, quickly," said the therapist, who was already leaning over the poor man, who continued to lie on the floor and moan in pain. "Jacob, examining here in the corridor." "Now the orderlies will put him on the couch," ordered Mason. The chief physician looked at the sick man with disdain. His appearance said that he had been living on the streets for a long time. They didn't like to mess with such patients, but they were obliged to help everyone. Jacob was not as squeamish as his superior. He didn't hesitate for a second. He started examining the patient right away. "Yeah. Call a surgeon. We need to operate," Jacob said. Not even 10 minutes later. It was Miranda's share to prepare the tramp for surgery. The girl was not surprised. She always had the most unpleasant jobs. The whole point was that Lisa's husband was exactly Mason. Of course, the girl avoided any unpleasant patients. Many people did not understand why she came to work at all. Miranda had no aversion to any of the people. She never looked at the social status of the patient. Whether he was a millionaire or a simple loader did not matter. The girl had a careful approach to everything, although if she had a choice, she would certainly prefer not to prepare a homeless man for surgery. The girl came out of the room and announced that the patient was ready for surgery. The orderlies and nurses looked at her with derision. "He's a good-looking man." Miranda, as Cindy's charge nurse, was the loudest of them all. "If he wasn't a tramp, he'd be a good husband for you." The women amicably supported Cindy's laughter and threw in more jokes. Miranda looked into their faces and realized that at the moment they disgusted her far more than the homeless man she had just walked out on. "That's our job, actually." Miranda couldn't take it anymore. "You, Cindy, cooked yesterday, Grandpa, but for some reason no one consecrated you to it." Cindy was taken aback at the abruptness. Everyone in the hospital was used to Miranda being teased. She was always silent in response to the woman, like a fish in a fishbowl, opening and closing her mouth, completely confused. "Look at that! She's got a voice!" Standing up for her friend Clara, an orderly. "And your business is to change ducks and give enemas." "I did part of your work, by the way, so you should keep quiet," Miranda snapped at her. The girl went to the nurse's room where Lasse was sitting, watching a TV show on her phone. She immediately walked over to Miranda, who had collapsed on the couch, flooding with tears and paying no attention to them. Supporting her co-worker was Lisa. She heard by ear the altercation that happened in the corridor, and she was used to the fact that grown women took out their anger on young nurses. If Lisa wasn't the wife of the head doctor, she'd be getting the same treatment. She was already a major topic for gossip and speculation. Miranda wiped her tears and got up from the dirty pillow. She waved her hand, signaling that she didn't need support. Miranda thought to herself that this homeless man really did have very handsome, delicate features. He must have been handsome once, but fate had dealt him a cruel hand. The tramp's name was James. Miranda had learned this the night before, when she visited him after the operation. He'd just had his appendix removed. Nothing serious, but he'll be in the hospital for a while. "I'm grateful for your help," James said quietly when he saw Miranda. "Oh, it's my job to thank you for nothing." The girl answered him indifferently and stuck the catheter in her vein. She was no longer disgusted by him. Miranda even felt a little ashamed that she had thought badly of him earlier. Everyone is worthy of help. Everyone should be treated with respect. The girl had always lived by those principles. She wasn't going to back down from them now either. How pleasant it was to see in James's eyes sincere gratitude. It wasn't possible to get it from every patient. No, this man couldn't possibly be a bad person. All the more reason not to judge him until you knew how it had come to be that he had to wander. Obviously, it didn't happen to James from a good life. The man spent 2 weeks in the hospital. Nobody liked this patient, not even the cleaning ladies. They looked at the poor guy with disdain. Only Miranda smiled at him, asked him how he was feeling, kept him talking. It seemed to her that James did not look like a man who had lived on the streets all his life. More than once that they had received people with no fixed abode. All of them were moral, unpleasant. James was nothing like these people. He was polite. It was as if the man felt guilty about going to the hospital and having so many people take care of him. Oh. "How's your friend doing?" Cindy asked with obvious mock anger in her voice. "I heard he's being discharged. In 2 days, he'll go back to collecting bottles." Miranda ignored the sneer from the woman, but wondered what would really happen to him. Would he really go to the basements in Cold Street? Such a short time after the surgery, his stitches hadn't even fully healed yet. The girl decided that she should definitely find out his story and find out if James has a place where he can continue to recover in peace. "You look worried today. Is something wrong?" asked James, who noticed that the nurse was not herself. "You're being discharged the day after tomorrow." "I'm worried that you won't follow the doctor's recommendations," Miranda answered him. "Do you have a place to rest? To have your stitches cleaned?" James lowered his head. He didn't want to answer that question. Miranda realized that he had no such place. The girl gathered courage and dared to ask how it happened that such a man, judging by his communication, very educated and well-mannered, ended up on the street. "Frankly speaking, I don't remember how it happened," James answered. "A little less than a year ago, I woke up in the woods. I was covered in mud and bruises. My head hurt like hell. I remember I couldn't even open one eye. What happened to me? How did I end up in the forest? Why am I covered in wounds and abrasions? I have no answers to any of these questions. I couldn't even remember my name. I made up the name James. For some reason, I thought that's what I'd always been called. But I don't know if I was always homeless or if something happened to me. Anyway, my story is being written now because everything that happened before I opened my eyes in the sun is a mystery to me." Miranda grimaced. It turns out that James could have been anyone, a millionaire or a gangster, a doctor, or a simple janitor. She knew that people sometimes lose their memory, forget themselves and their loved ones, but she had never imagined that she could face this in reality. "Did you ask the police for help? Did you try to find your relatives?" Miranda asked. "When I woke up in the woods, I was completely disoriented," James continued. "To be honest, I wanted to kill myself right there, because I didn't see any point in being like that. My whole body was aching. How far to town? Where in the world am I going to go? Total emptiness. But I wandered out of the forest. I found my way out pretty quickly and just followed the highway. I don't know how long it took me to get there, but I ended up in this town. Can you imagine what my appearance was like after the hard road? Oh, and I had been lying in the woods for an unknown amount of time. Miranda even sat down on the next bed to make herself comfortable and listen to the rest of the story. She was experiencing James's grief as her own. She even began to bite her nails with excitement and interest, as if she was not listening to the life story of her patient, but watching a thriller. James told her that he immediately went to the police. Where else would he go? But there he was, chased away. The policeman mistook the man for a homeless man who had had too much healthy alcohol and had a memory. In a small provincial town, no one was going to waste their time on the problems of little people. That's what they told me. To get away and stay out of sight. Otherwise, they would lock me up for 15 days, James recalled. His voice was shaking, and at some points it was clear that the man was worried. I asked for help. I explained that I had no documents. I didn't even remember my name. I was told that no missing persons report had been filed. They hinted unequivocally that no one would waste time on me. I gave up, realized there was nowhere to wait for help. I hoped my memory would come back, but it didn't. They called me a drunkard and a bum. I don't remember how I used to live, but I was definitely sure that the cheap vodka offered to me by the vagrants on the heating duct didn't draw me in. I am sure that I had never wandered around abandoned construction sites and basements before. But there's nowhere to go. I didn't have the strength to go any further. So I found myself a dilapidated house, started tracking there. Miranda was now convinced that James should not be sent out on the streets again. It was one thing to rest after a beating, quite another to be rehabilitated after a surgical treatment with a living stitch underneath. He was bound to get some kind of infection or complication. The girl began to make plans on how she could help
The man. The answer to us, given her question, came unexpectedly when she looked in on Kelly again. The old lady started telling Miranda again that she needed to find a friend.
I'm not talking about a man. At least find a friend, Kelly wailed. All alone? I feel sorry for you. Only us old ladies are your company. I think people come into our lives, Miranda reasoned. You can't stand in the middle of the street and yell that you're looking for company. Fate itself sends us the right person. Only we do not always notice the gifts of fate, answered her neighbor. We all dwell on ourselves, and fate is right there, lying at our side.
This empty conversation with the old woman made Miranda look at her life differently. What if she's right? What if James was in the hospital for a reason? On her shift? The exact day after her birthday when she'd made her wish? After all, it was
about getting rid of loneliness. Her mom had always told her, too, that life helps those who care for others. As we are to the world, so it is to us. The day of James's discharge came. Miranda had a decision ready, but she was afraid of getting rejected. The previous night, the girl remembered that she had made a birthday wish for deliverance from loneliness. What if James is the person who's going to be her friend? What if he's the one who can help her in some way? Even if he wasn't going to be any use to her, she could help him. She just couldn't allow the thought of James going out on the streets. Everyone should have a home and a chance at a normal life. You must vacate your bunk this afternoon, James told Miranda. Then the nurse fell silent. She herself was afraid of what she wanted to say next. But the fear was due to shyness, not because she was afraid of a stranger in the house. Miranda felt that James was incapable of evil. One might even say that she saw him as a kindred spirit. A man who was just as needy and resentful of life. Could he, who had endured so much suffering, bring it to anyone else? Men, without her reminding him. I knew it. He dreaded the day coming. He liked the hospital, even though it wasn't an elite facility. After the cold basements and the daily search for food, 2 weeks under the roof with 3 meals a day seemed like paradise. Miranda noticed that the man was a little angry at the phrase she had said. The girl even blushed. She realized that her words sounded like a reminder that it was time to pack up and leave. Miranda hastened to rectify the situation and make her suggestion. Don't think I'm implying that it's time to pack your bags, Miranda quickly echoed. I would like to invite you to my place, at least for a while. Until you shish kebabs heal. and then together we can go to the police. Restore your documents and identity. I promise to help in any way I can. James looked sadly at his dirty jeans and sweater that Miranda had brought him. Then the man shifted his gaze to the hard hospital bed he so badly didn't want to part with. It wasn't enough to say that he was embarrassed to accept the offer from the nurse. He couldn't explain to himself why she would do it, but he didn't want to turn down the opportunity to live in the apartment. "Are you sure about your decision?" James asked. "Inviting a stranger into the house? Why would you do that?" "I feel sorry for you. I can see you're a good man. I'm just sure you won't give me any trouble," Miranda replied. The girl perked up a bit. She even came closer to James and cried. Sunny, friendly smiles. "I'm lonely, unhappy." "I see the same thing in you," Miranda said in a whisper. "It seems to me that people like that should stick together. We can help each other. Fate brought us together for a reason. Miranda, you are an amazing girl." James smiled back. "I hope you realize that it would be very foolish of me to refuse such an offer." James was ashamed to agree. He was in no hurry to answer, Hamburg, but the man realized that such an opportunity might not come again. In spite of the gravity of his situation, it seemed to him an impertinence. But after all, the girl herself had offered. She even persuades him. Is she really that unhappy? The nurse told him she didn't expect him to refuse. Miranda was as happy as if she had won the lottery instead of inviting a tramp from the street. The girl told James to wait for her outside the gatehouse after lunch. She said she would try to ask for time off to help them and set up in her apartment. But Miranda didn't think about the fact that the hospital had ears everywhere. The orderlies and nurses only act their workdays that they were going through each other's bones. Passing by the room, passed Clara, the same nurse who was the girlfriend of the head nurse, Cindy. After the altercation, Cindy moved in on Miranda. The woman was only looking for an excuse to mess with her, and Slaga was very lucky to overhear the conversation between James and the poor girl. Of course, the news that Miranda decided to live with a homeless man from the street was simply explosive. The entire medical staff of the city hospital was just talking about it. Miranda had not even had time to leave James's room yet, and became the main topic of discussion. The news couldn't help but reach Lisa, and from her to Mason himself. "Tip, yes, love!" mockingly shouted Cindy from her stand at the end of the hallway. Miranda was used to it. She had been teased all of 2 weeks about getting too close to James. And bitter was already something to shout about. The girl joined in the mockery. "I hope those two stooges are just making something up again," Lisa Miranda said in a low voice. She ran up to her and grabbed Miranda by the elbow and looked at her friend with incomprehension. Then Lisa explained to her that the whole hospital was buzzing about the tramp living at her house. "Where do you suggest I send him to?" Miranda asked her colleague. "Well, not in the apartment. He will steal from you and run away." Lisa tried to dissuade Miranda from the idea. "I'm sure there are shelters, some charitable foundations. Send him there. How many orphanages do you know? Name one in our backwoods province, and I'll be sure to send him there." Miranda couldn't take it anymore. The girl was visibly angry. Lisa was confused and let go of Miranda's hand. The girl flapped her eyes. She thought it was strange that her buddy would respond so rudely. She had given her good advice, though there really wasn't a shelter in their town, only an orphanage and a nursing home. But James didn't fit into either the first or second category. Miranda made her way to Mason's office. The man, fortunately, did not suffer from the urge to nitpick and hurt his subordinates, unlike his employees. Causing the girl more bullying, the doctor was not going to do. He listened carefully to Miranda's requests. She wanted to take an afternoon off from work. "Our girl is affectionate," Mason said excessively politely. "I don't know how much, to what degree of despair your loneliness has driven you." but bringing home a man off the street is definitely not a good idea. Miranda sighed heavily. He knows it already. The nurse immediately started making excuses, explaining that she hadn't meant to bring anyone anywhere, that Cindy had simply decided to take revenge for the rude conversation. Cindy Ours certainly has a poisonous temper, Mason confirmed. The man talked to Miranda the way he talks to mentally ill people, talking them out of jumping off a roof. But I have every reason to believe her at the moment. I'm not letting you go. I'm only doing this for you. I hope that for the rest of your shift, you think and don't commit such an extraordinary act. Unarmine. I also hope James decides that you've tricked him and goes somewhere else. Mason made it clear that the conversation was over. He had no intention of answering any more of Miranda's questions. The girl pushed with her foot and left the office, slamming the door loudly. She immediately made her way to James's room. "This is the address of my house," Miranda said, and handed over the note, where she wrote the street and house number. She didn't specify the apartment yet. "As soon as you're discharged, go there. Sit there on the bench. Wait for me in the courtyard until evening. There's always some nice old ladies sitting there. You can talk to them. I'll be there. They wouldn't let me out after 600 hours. James." "I see." Levo nodded. Miranda made it to the end of her shift with a feeling of excitement in her chest. It was unclear what she was more afraid of, that James would change his mind, avoid, or that he would wait for her. Miranda got home seemingly twice as fast as she usually did. She had hoped to see him near the entrance or somewhere close to the house, but he was nowhere to be found. The girl was upset, which meant that she would still want him to wait for her.
And the harsher the desire to invite him to visit was not foolishness, weakness. She sincerely wanted to help the man. Before heading home, Miranda stopped by Kelly's. She needed to get an injection. When the girl entered the old lady's apartment,
She immediately noticed that there was a pair of men's shoes in the hallway. She thought that her grandson had come to visit her. "I'm sorry, I guess I'm not on time. Let me come back later for a quick visit." Miranda was about to leave, but Kelly stopped her. "Where are you going?" "Your comrade is visiting, isn't he?" The old woman said good-naturedly and pulled the girl by the arm. Then she whispered in her ear, "He's a good man. I approve, but he's dirty. You take care of him. In good hands, a man will be transformed at once." Miranda blushed. She was embarrassed that the neighbor thought James was her lover. Why had she come to that conclusion? Could it be that he had told her so himself? Miranda pushed the unnecessary thoughts out of her head, divorced herself, and went straight to the bathroom to wash her hands after the street. James was sitting in the kitchen. He looked as if Kelly had kept him here against his will. Oh, Pauline could understand the man perfectly well. That old lady really could be a little too intrusive sometimes. She immediately dragged me in for tea. "I only said I was waiting for you," James said apologetically. "Don't worry, I know you well." "She can't," Miranda replied and smiled broadly. "She thinks you're my fiancé. They've been trying to match me up with someone for a long time." The last words made James' face a little darker. Pauline also quickly realized how her words sounded. The girl quickly explained that she meant what they take for her suitors. Any male person who starts talking to her, be it the mailman or the janitor. "I'm 25 years old," Miranda explained. "I've never been in a relationship in all these years." Kelly entered the kitchen and interrupted this awkward conversation. Miranda was overjoyed to see the woman immediately volunteering to help get the cups, place in a plate, and cookies. James and Miranda did not stay with Kelly for long. Much to the girl's credit, she wanted to get away from the woman's insidious questions as soon as possible. She was very embarrassed in front of James. Miranda gave the man a quick tour of her small apartment and then immediately told him it was time to go to bed. She had to take a shift at the Genius Hospital in the morning tomorrow. She told me to get plenty of rest. It was the most nervous day of the week. Everyone felt it was their duty to tease the nurse for her virtue. They said she'd come home today and find she'd been robbed. I don't have anything to steal. Shouldn't you learn to trust people? Miranda responded to her abusers. She'd learned to ignore any jibes in her direction. Her co-workers lost interest in teasing her, but among themselves, they only discussed it, the girl's reckless act. The man recovered quite quickly, but the girl still did not drive him away. She went to a lawyer to see if James could restore the documents, get a passport again. But an acquaintance who agreed to advise her saddened her with the news. She reported that the man is likely to be sent to a psychiatric hospital. There, they will try to restore his memory. But if he gets to our department, it will be most likely he will be more quickly threatened there than cured. The girl made a final verdict. Miranda was very frightened. She had grown attached to James. He helped her around the house, even cooked meals while she was at work. She didn't want to condemn a man to such a terrible fate. It had been 3 months since James had started living with Miranda. The girl had the day off. At last, she could sleep sweetly through the afternoon. But in the morning, she was awakened by the sound of the door closing. Her lodger had gone out. This surprised Miranda and scared her a little because James had never gone anywhere alone before. The real panic came when the man didn't come home after an hour. He didn't have his cell phone. Miranda couldn't even call to find out where he'd been fasting. Had he really decided to leave? A thought ran through her head. The clock was already showing the 7th hour of the evening. All day, Miranda sat in front of the television, trying to distract herself. Every time she flinched, and if she thought the door was opening, she kept glancing at the clock. But that one didn't seem to her. The front door handle did turn. The creak of the hinges confirmed that James had returned home, where he had been all day. Immediately, Miranda pounced on the man with questions. You can't just leave like that without warning. I'm sorry, I didn't realize I'd be gone so long. James replied, guiltily. Without knowing the couple's history, their conversation could have been mistaken for a marital quarrel. Miranda regarded James as her husband, who had left the house without warning. But I, with the good news, immediately tried to smooth the atmosphere of James. The man confessed that he felt terribly embarrassed about living on Miranda's full-time maintenance. Even though he tried to justify his existence with household chores, it did not help to quiet the voice of conscience. James said that he saw an ad for movers. He decided to try his luck. Now, he looked quite decent for such an unprestigious profession. Surely he could fit in. Of course, he was worried that his lack of papers might make it difficult to get a job. I decided that it was better to try and regret it than not to take the risk and regret that I hadn't even tried. James said pathetically, Don't tell me you got a job as a longshoreman. You've just had surgery, right? Miranda was worried like a mom about her son. It's amazing how protective the girl was of her new friend. She really didn't demand anything from him in return. His company was enough for her. Not once did Miranda regret her decision to live alone. It was much worse. It's been 3 months, James laughed. I haven't had any pain for a long time. A healthy man shouldn't have to sit on a fragile girl's neck. Anyway, as you might guess, they hired me and told me I'd be working unofficially. It was the first shift today, so I was late. But dinner's on me tonight. I suggest we go to the cafeteria. We should celebrate. Although Miranda was worried about James at first, she was still happy about the news. Now they would live like a real married couple, keep a common budget. Their relationship is moving at a rapid pace, although there had been no hint of romance between them for 3 months. After James began to go to work, the girl looked at him with completely different eyes. Now she saw a real man in front of her, who not only helps around the house, but also brings money into the family. Miranda really began to feel herself under his protection. She had a strong feeling that they lived with James as a couple. But it was Kelly who was happiest of all. The old woman had already forgotten that Miranda had told her that James used to live on the street. She invited the couple to visit her and praised the girl. Each time she resented the neighbors' overly obsessive way of taking them to each other. Kelly spread the news that Miranda had finally found a fiancé. Surprisingly, how opposite the mood was to this news.
At first, the man was dressed in something Kelly had passed down to him from his son and grandson. It looked a little ridiculous, but it was still better than it was. When James started earning money, he was able to afford to buy his own clothes.
Would you tell me that you were still living on the streets 4 months ago? I wouldn't have believed it, Miranda once said. If someone had told me 4 months ago that I would be sleeping in a warm bed and eating a hot meal, I wouldn't have believed it, James replied. He didn't like to remember the time he'd spent wandering, but sometimes it came over him, especially in his dreams. The man was constantly dreaming that he was back to sleeping in some basement on cardboard with another vagrant snoring next to him, giving off a persistent odor of booze and unwashed body odor. James would often wake up and contemplate suddenly his new happy life. It was just a vision. He was even afraid to fall asleep because he knew in his dreams he would be on the street again rummaging through dumpsters for food and clothes. They were sitting in the kitchen. They were both tired after a day's work, but so happy. Miranda was happy that she had someone to rush home to, someone to cook dinner for. James was just happy, because now his life was exactly the same as any normal person's. A house, a job, and a woman he loved. Yes, the man had long been inflamed with tender feelings for the line, but he was afraid to admit it. James thought that the girl helped him only out of pity. He was so afraid that one day she would get tired of all this, and she would send him back to the street. Miranda didn't even think about it, and she was developing feelings for the man. She didn't want to imagine her life apart from James anymore. It only took the two of them 6 months from the day they met to fall in love. James, as a man, decided to make the first move. First of all, he wanted clarity. Secondly, he decided for himself that he would either live with Miranda as her lover, or he would just leave. The man realized that the further this story dragged on, the more painful the separation would be. Like a schoolboy, James trembled before the confession. He even got down on his knee for something, as if he wanted to propose. But he realized from Miranda's eyes that he had nothing to fear. She looked at him so tenderly that all the excitement evaporated. The girl did not even listen to the ardent speech, which the man composed not one evening, choosing the right words and turns. 6 months ago, Miranda had been preparing the homeless man for surgery, fighting her squeamishness. Today, she hugged him tightly and kissed him on the lips. The girl responded that James's feelings were mutual. Miranda remembered her birthday. How could she not believe in miracles?
As soon as she made a wish, James went to the hospital. Only she'd never imagined that the drifter from the street would become the man of her heart. But she didn't care anymore. She couldn't boast a rich pedigree either. The man always went to work in a good mood. He was still a loader in a furniture shop. He liked the work. In addition, he could socialize with other men who did not even guess that James in the past was a bum. But one day he woke up with gloomy thoughts at breakfast. He sat down with the same, not cheerful expression on his face. Miranda noticed it immediately and asked what was wrong. Nothing's wrong, James replied. Yesterday I had a fight with the foreman of our workshop, so much so that it still remains. Don't pay attention to them. I'm still in trouble for living with a tramp too. Miranda backed him up.
If you stop responding to his attacks, he'll just lose interest in bothering you. James's mood didn't change from such advice. He himself knew that the best defense against ridicule was indifference. But the man couldn't help himself. As soon as he arrived at work, James happened to notice the shop foreman Jacob chatting with customers. It seemed that he was trying not to sell furniture, but on the contrary, to dissuade them to never contact this company at all. Jacob, we will be without orders for so long. Why did you tell them that we have every fifth piece is defective? James couldn't take it anymore. He made the remark without negativity, trying to choose words as gently as possible. I'm just an honest man, Jacob answered him, noticeably annoyed. You're just a common loader, and it's not my fault that you really haven't made a single order without a defect yet. So you have workers drinking vodka right at lunchtime, and you do not make a remark to them, what kind of quality will you get here? Again, as good-naturedly as possible, James said. That was the last straw. Having got to the already angry Jacob, he turned on poor James, pointed out to him that his place was in the garbage, as before. Yesterday, I was digging in the garbage, and today you're teaching me how to lead a team. You think so? Shouted the foreman. He's just walking around, giving advice. I'll tell everyone where you came from. It turns out that the foreman of the shop where James worked was Cindy's brother. It just so happened that yesterday they met and talked about work. Jacob shared how an ordinary loader teaches him how to manage a team. And Cindy laughed, yes, almost to the point of tears, about how their young nurse had taken a vagrant into her home. So, word by word, they found out they were talking about the same couple. It cannot be said that James was much frightened that his secret was now out in the open. The owner of the furniture factory, who eventually hired the man, knew he was undocumented. Noah decided to help James because he reminded him so much of someone. He thought it might be a relative of someone he knew because the face was very familiar. Noah often came to the shop to check how the work was going, to talk to his workers. The man noted that the new loader alone was much smarter than all his employees put together. He offered sensible ideas to optimize production, even put forward some promotion and advertising ideas. Noah witnessed the conversation between James and Jacob. Stop tearing his throat out. Stopped his master Noah. The man gives you sound advice? Jacob immediately shrank in size. He tried to object, saying that an unofficial worker could cause a lot of problems for the company. They were like brother and sister when they folded. Even checks could be avoided. Their characters were identical. Both had a high ego, but in front of the bosses shrank into a ball, no more than you. With your facial expression when talking to customers. Immediately stop the flow of speech. Jacob, I am the boss. If you scare the customers, you will not have a job. You will continue to sit, or up to a shot glass to the mouth. Only without a paycheck. Jacob left offended and extremely dissatisfied with the conversation. Noah even shook James's hand and thanked him for opening his eyes to what was going on. How is it that a man with such intelligence and cleverness is working as a loader, and he is on the street without papers? Noah asked. Oh, if I had known, I would have told you, replied James. Do you have an entrepreneurial spirit? I can see you in the bosses, but not in the movers. Noah ended the conversation and went about his business. G didn't really understand why he was being praised. It seemed to him that he was just saying obvious things. He was also surprised that Jacob, having been a production foreman for several years now, did not understand them. How did James have all this knowledge? He didn't realize it himself. It just seemed obvious to him. Maybe it has something to do with my past. That was a thought James sometimes entertained, but he dismissed it every time. In his mind, it was impossible. Miranda left for work even earlier than James did. All morning she was tormented by nausea. The girl would have paid no attention to this ailment if it had been the first time. But ill health tormented her for more than one day. To all this was added dizziness and complete loss of appetite. Miranda looked in her women's calendar and was horrified to find what every girl who doesn't plan to become a mom in the near future fears. On her lunch break, Miranda ran to the pharmacy to get a pregnancy test. She wanted to either confirm or deny her hunch as soon as possible. Therefore, now the girl did not wait until evening. With the test she bought, she went to the women's restroom of the hospital. So wait 5 minutes. Reading Miranda's instructions. Oh my God, I think I can see the second stripe. All right, let's wait like we're supposed to. Miranda was sure she was alone in the ladies' room, so she was talking out loud. She always did that when she was worried. For some reason, it calmed her down. 5 minutes passed, and Miranda lowered her eyes to the test again. She couldn't believe her eyes. Brought the strip closer to her and squinted. Not again, came out of Miranda's mouth. Suddenly, the door of one of the stalls opened abruptly. Slaga jumped out of it, her eyes bulging with happiness. The woman was happy that she was the first to know the news in 5 minutes. There won't be a single person in the hospital who won't know that Miranda got pregnant by a tramp. Clara, I beg you, don't tell anyone, Miranda begged. You see, I just found out. Hey! It's a private matter. Really? Screamed Clara. You should have thought of that before. I can imagine Cindy laughing out loud right now. Can you hear her laughing in your house? The nurse ran out of the school. Ladies, and stumbled toward the nurse's station. She was literally shaking with how much she wanted to tell the gossip. Her eyes were running joyfully, imagining how that they would muse and pass the story from mouth to mouth. Pauline was afraid to leave the restroom. It seemed to her that Cindy and her friends were waiting for her, but there was no escape. It was getting close to lunchtime, but the girl was right. As soon as she stepped out and walked down the hallway, she was accompanied by mocking glances everywhere. Miranda, I hope it's all just rumors and innuendo. Lisa ran up to Miranda and, as usual, took her under the elbow, leading her away. And if it isn't, then what is it? Miranda was angry. You'll make me laugh, like everyone else in this hospital. No, she was taken aback by Lisa's rudeness. All I can say is that this problem has to be solved. It's not too early. You can't have a baby with that bum. Miranda pulled her elbow sharply out of Lisa's grasp. She looked at her friend with such anger that she felt uncomfortable. After this incident, their communication ceased. Now, Miranda had no one among her colleagues with whom she could keep in touch. But every time, she got smirks and comments about her pregnancy. For a whole week, Miranda hid her situation from James. She did not know how men would react to such news. The girl did not want to get rid of the baby, but she was very afraid that they would not be able to afford a child. It's one thing to live on the salary of a loader and a nurse, but it's another thing to have a baby. One stroller or crib was no longer within their budget. Noah, meanwhile, couldn't get over his employee. He was literally haunted by the thought of, where could I have seen him? The man secretly took a picture of James and showed it to all his friends and acquaintances. Not many people knew the man by sight. Some people said they were seeing him for the first time. Others said it was a very familiar man, but they couldn't remember him. One day, Noah went to an exhibition of modern technologies for furniture production. Many of his colleagues and partners were there, as well as capable and ambitious young people. Noah was welcomed with open arms by his friend and investor, Charles. How nice to see you, Noah said, especially for Steve. Intonation rehearsed for such meetings, although Charles and Noah had been friends since high school. The format of the event called for this kind of non-sincere socializing. Charles had grown far above Noah in status. A few years ago, he moved to the capital. After the standard conversations, Noah remembered what prevented him from sleeping at night and showed Charles's phone to get a better look at the blurred picture. Look, he looks a lot like a friend of mine from the capital, but he died a little over a year ago, Charles said thoughtfully. If I hadn't been at his funeral, I would have thought it was him. Or maybe a brother, Noah suggested. Charles replied that the businessman didn't have any relatives like brothers at all. Only his wife did not. But now she was not in touch with anyone from her spouse's acquaintances. Why are you doing this nonsense? Suddenly, Charles Benjamin's son entered the conversation. Upload the photo to the internet. It will show you the person you are looking for. The men looked at each other, not understanding what the boy was saying. Benjamin sighed heavily and picked up Noah's phone. 2 seconds, 2 taps on the touchscreen, and the browser produced the first name, last name, and social media of the person Noah had taken so long to find. James. I read it. Noah. Right, ear. How did I not realize that? That's him, huh? I hate to break it to you, but I was at his funeral about a year and a half ago, Charles said and looked at the screen. But it's the same face, isn't it? A relative, maybe? That's him, isn't it? Benjamin said confidently. The network counted him according to his individual features. So it hadn't just found a similar man, it had found the right man. Charles wondered how that was possible. Benjamin helped him and reminded him what kind of world they lived in. Money decides everything. Dad, Benjamin said a little sadly. Someone just wanted to take out the competition. So much for a bum in the provinces with no memory, but great leadership skills. Noah didn't tell anyone that he had found out who his loader was. He decided not to give James himself his memory back either. Unfortunately, Noah was not such an honorable man. He decided to use this information to his own ends. James had already shown that even though he had forgotten himself, he had not lost his mental faculties. The man gave out amazing ideas, was an excellent leader, but the potential of James was dampened by Jacob, whose ego was hurt. Noah decided to take advantage of the fact that his company got such a valuable staff, who was also willing to work for pennies. In addition, he could twist the topics as he wished. After all, James had no documents and already angry legs. But Jacob received terrible news for himself. After the return of Noah from the capital, boss decided to make the loader a second foreman. Are you kidding now? Jacob became furious. He has no education, no papers. He's a bum. A girl took him in out of pity. Will he be your assistant and counselor? Naturally, unofficially spoke almost in Jacob Noah's ear, listening to his thoughts. Work in pairs. If you arise, James will take your place. I see. Jacob nodded grudgingly and pounded the wall with his fist. As soon as Noah came out of his cubicle, there was no choice but to go and tell the loader the news of such a sharp promotion. Miranda cried all evening. James was late after work, but that wasn't what upset her, or even the fact that she had become a laughingstock at the hospital. Miranda was worried about how she would raise the child, was figuring out where to put the crib in their tiny apartment, how to bring down the stroller with the baby from the 9th floor, without an elevator, which no one had ever fixed. Obviously, nothing will change in the near future. All in all, she had plenty of reasons to worry. The front door opened. It was James returning from his shift. The girl heard the man rustling something in the hallway. She quickly wiped her tears and went to meet her lover. It was James who spoke to you. His face was adorned with a wide smile. Are we having some kind of celebration? Miranda asked and held the buds to her nose. Why did you have to spend so much money? Your man is a master craftsman now, so flowers for the woman he loves are not a big waste for him, James said proudly. Miranda instantly forgot about all her problems. She smiled. Her eyes glazed over. Of course, she rejoiced at the news of the pay raise. The girl was proud of James. Miranda immediately asked how was this possible? In just a few months, the life of a vagrant had changed so dramatically. James realized that Miranda was solely to blame for this. If she hadn't given him a chance, if she hadn't taken pity on him, he would never have gotten out of the hole he had fallen into, unbeknownst to himself. For a whole month now, James had been in his new position. In that time, however, the number of customers had increased and the products had become much higher quality. Noah was proud of his brilliant idea to get such a brain for so little pay. It was a real stroke of luck. The factory owner relaxed. He was sure that things would only get better from now on. The man relaxed, but the fact that James might get his memory back, he never thought. There was an important meeting with an investor in the capital. Noah realized that James simply needed to attend this meeting. The man needed to get a better grasp of the company's affairs, to understand the new tasks, to gain experience. James agreed to the business trip. It was a journey for him because he thought he had never been anywhere but this small provincial town. Then Miranda was a little upset. Newsgirl is already used to living alone, but for the sake of her lover's career, she was willing to tolerate 1 night or 2 days. Miranda never told James about the fact that soon they will become parents. Her belly was not visible yet. She was waiting for the right moment. After James got his new position, the girl became a little more confident. She didn't worry so much anymore, but she was still afraid to tell her man about her situation. James was as excited about the trip as a small child to another city. The train, the documents, the strict suits were all new to him. But the more James lived his new life, the more confident he began to feel. It seemed to him that his life was built approximately like that, and earlier business meetings, negotiations, deals. Though it was hard to believe it, of course. Now the memory did not return to the man, but the inner feeling as if came in harmony. And here in front of James is a huge building. Now there on the top floor of this glass high-rise, he would be sitting at a table with important people, looking out the panoramic windows of the city. He's the man who less than a year ago was looking for food in a dumpster. Someone who was laughed at by the entire staff of a dirty provincial hospital. Now businessmen with vast fortunes will shake hands with the man who caused the shame of the unfortunate one. Young nurses. James entered the conference room after Noah. The man tried to straighten and make his gaze more serious, but he still didn't look like his superior. The habit of horribets and hiding away from people had fused tightly with him. Over the course of his wanderings, the door opened and the investor walked in. Once the genius looked at him, he could no longer take his eyes off this man. In his head, quickly drew a picture of a night forest, an expensive car. In the back seat that sat a lady with a cruel smile. James even felt a headache, especially in the area of the top of his head. A beautiful young man who shook his hand and introduced himself as Liam. In James's memory, he remained an embittered stranger who brought his fists down on James's face with unimaginable ferocity. Liam did not recognize the man who was now in a nice suit signing multi-million-dollar contracts. Here James remembered him. He was no longer listening to what Noah and Liam were saying. The names Betty and William were quickly coming back to his mind. Suddenly, he saw a picture of him leaving his mansion, getting into an expensive car with a luxury leather interior. Was that why he was so calm and comfortable within those walls? Because it was all in his past. Betty, whispered James quietly. But thankfully, no one heard him. The man was ready to pounce on Liam right now, because it was because of him that he'd lost everything he'd been working toward for years. That Betty was sitting in that car in the woods. She was the one who'd poisoned her lover for her husband. For what? For the money, of course. James waited patiently until the negotiations were over. For the rest of the time, he sat tense under the table. His fists clenched to such an extent that they were barely beaten. "How long have you been working with this man?" James asked Noah. After the meeting was over, the man tried to keep his voice as calm as possible, but he still nodded occasionally, giving away his excitement, or rather anger. Noah was so pleased with the successful contract that he didn't notice his subordinate's condition. He didn't even realize that he had contributed to James's memory coming back. He did not suspect that soon his ingenious plan would fail. In fact, not so long ago, it was a young but very promising businessman, said Noah. So suddenly, this kid appeared. It's a quick turnaround. We're very lucky to work with people like that. You bet, James put in contemptuously. But Noah didn't notice it again. James and his boss were to spend the night in the capital to finalize the paperwork in the morning. But now, James had new plans. He intended to get back everything that had been taken from him by unfair means. There was no point in going to Carrie. The ex-wife would probably decide to get even with her husband again. But James had a best friend, his loyal comrade since high school, William. This man wielded great power. Even someone as important as Liam would be easy for him to take down. All he has to do is find him, peace Kerhurvast, and that James has one night to do it. No matter how hard James tried to reconstruct William's phone number or address in his memory, he could never do it. But yeah, this was the night he missed. The next day, Liam did not show up for the meeting. He sent his lawyer instead. I wish he hadn't recognized me. That would make things much more difficult for me, James thought, but Liam didn't remember him. He didn't even pay attention to James during the negotiations. He was not interested in petty assistants and deputies. The man worked only with the most authoritative people. He must return home to Miranda's apartment. The fact that his memory came back to him in no way changed his attitude to his beloved. But he did not confess to her that he knew his past. He did not want to frighten her or spoil the relationship in any way. Let Miranda still lives in ignorance, but then she is in for a surprise. Until James figures out how to get her back, he will continue to play the role of a memory-deprived drifter. But the next morning, he suddenly remembered the cottage village outside the city. That's where his friend had lived. He could only hope that William hadn't moved away. During the time James wandered the streets, Miranda was walking home after another difficult day at the hospital. Her co-workers went ballistic. More and more barbs were hurled in her direction. Cindy couldn't help herself, even though she knew that James had already received a high status. She never missed an opportunity to remind Miranda that she had found the father of her child on the street. I'll tell him everything today, whatever happens, Miranda thought. She decided that soon she wouldn't be able to hide her pregnancy anyway. James had already asked Miranda a couple of times if she had put on weight. He thought her cheeks were a little rounder. James was supposed to be at home. Miranda knew that he had been given time off after his business trip to the capital. The girl had gone in to get a cake for the party. Still, she was sure that her beloved would be happy about the news. She had already tried a couple of times to start a conversation about children, and James answered that he would very much like a child. But when she returned home, Miranda immediately realized that something was wrong. The door was locked. 2 turns. They never locked it that way if they were at home. The apartment was completely silent, something that had never happened before either. James always had the television on. Miranda called out to her lover, but no one answered her. The girl went to the kitchen and noticed the note. Her heart immediately pounded. That piece of paper did not bode well. Miranda slowly walked to the table, took the note with shaky hands and read, "Forced to leave. I'm sorry, I'll try to explain as best I can." He left me, Miranda asked aloud. Tears quickly flowed down her cheeks. It can't be. Why not? Miranda felt dizzy. She sat down on the floor and screamed in pain. From the heartache that was just tearing her from the inside, the girl scolded herself and screamed why and why. It was impossible to believe that she had been abandoned by a man who had sworn his love just yesterday. She had done so much good for him, and he had left without even saying goodbye, leaving a one-sentence note. For an entire hour, Miranda lay on the floor, washing herself with her own tears. She couldn't get up, couldn't calm down. I should have left him to die. Why did I even call him home? Were all those women right? I'd just been taken advantage of and abandoned. Miranda screamed and berated herself. The girl beat her fist on the floor and ran out from the pain in her chest. She could only regain consciousness when she noticed that her hand was covered in blood. Miranda was frightened. She figured she had smashed her fist so hard while drumming on the floor. But the reality was even worse. The girl had given in to her emotions so much that she hadn't felt any real physical pain. Miranda picked herself up off the floor and noticed that not only her arm, but the floor beneath it was stained with a red viscous liquid. She then looked at her legs all the way down her depths. Her gym pants were now red. She began to bleed. Miranda immediately grabbed the phone and called an ambulance. While Miranda was being rushed to the hospital with a threatened miscarriage, she passed out. It was too much shock for one day. She just couldn't take it. All day, the poor woman endured humiliation and abuse from her colleagues, and then learned that the man she loved had left her, and now she could lose her baby. So many trials have fallen on the poor girl's shoulders. Miranda opened her eyes in a hospital room. She had been brought to the very hospital where she worked. It made sense. There was no other hospital in town. "Is your work keeping you busy, Miranda?" joked the doctor who entered the room. "That's the downside of our profession. Even on sick leave, we have to be at work." "Perhaps, Ethan, you'd like to tell me more about my condition." "What about the baby?" Miranda asked. She didn't sound aggressive. She was just worried sick. "It's fine. We've stopped the bleeding. You'll have to stay on bed rest for a while." "We'll keep an eye on your condition," Ethan replied. "What? Even the bum got away from you?" Cindy said snidely. Cindy poked her head into the room. Ethan immediately shooed her away. "Poor thing. You gave her a nervous breakdown. You must have a shred of conscience," the doctor scolded. Miranda turned her back to the wall so that no one would notice her tears. The girl was already indifferent to the words of her haters. She only thought about the fact that she would be forced to raise the child alone, but the girl was sure that she would do everything to make this baby the happiest in the world. Let in a shabby 9-story building, let without a father and expensive toys, he will get the most valuable things. What Miranda herself didn't have, a mother's love and support. The time passed quickly before lunch, but afterward it seemed to drag on endlessly. That's what always happens in hospitals during checkup procedures. Those hours fly by, but there was nothing to do after quiet time. There was no television in their hospital. Miranda didn't even bring books or magazines with her, nor was there anyone who could come to visit her and bring her some goodies. All the girl could do was fight her tears, which were piling up like this. "Wow, what a car has pulled up!" Suddenly, Miranda, the neighbor in the ward, exclaimed. She was looking out the window to dispel the boredom a little, but Miranda herself couldn't stand up yet. It was too weak. "Only our mayor probably has one, though he doesn't have one," the neighbor reasoned. "Maybe the governor has arrived. We should tell him about the conditions in which we are kept here." Even Miranda was curious about the car that had pulled up. She tried to get out of bed, but could not. There was some commotion in the corridor. The orderlies and nurses were running back and forth. Now Elena thought that someone very important had come to the hospital. Only an official could make such a fuss. "I'm so happy for you." Suddenly, Lisa came into the room and turned to Miranda. She didn't understand why her friend was suddenly happy for her. The recent events of her life were clearly not a cause for joy. But then James appeared in the doorway. He looked different. His hair was neat, fashionably cut by his wife. The man was dressed in an expensive and stylish suit. James was holding a bouquet like Miranda had never seen before. "Wait for me outside the door," James asked. Two oversized men in black suits and dark glasses. "I don't understand anything," Miranda said slowly, shaking her head. "Why are you here and why are you so degraded?" "And who are these people?" James asked to let him speak. The first thing he did was apologize for disappearing like that, but he didn't want to waste a minute. "I'm not very good with words," James admitted shamefully. "I can imagine what you must have thought when you saw that note, but I just didn't want to admit it to you ahead of time. I wasn't sure I'd be able to punish my abusers and get my past back so quickly." "What past?" Miranda wondered. She still didn't understand what was going on. "Did you remember everything?" "Yes," replied James. "I remember all the times I was taken to the woods and beaten. The way my ex-wife, had watched me slowly being killed. She and her lover thought that they'd get away with it. They were sure that they'd thought of every detail, taken me far away into the woods. What they didn't realize was that I would survive. James told me that his wife had found a young lover. If she had just filed for divorce, she wouldn't have gotten a dime because she and James had a prenuptial agreement. Betty hired thugs who stunned him, put him in a trunk, and drove him into the woods. Liam, the lover of his wife, decided to take part in the massacre of Betty's husband himself. Most likely, this saved James's life, because professional bandits would have surely brought the case to the end. But Liam only achieved that about the man's memory.
"If it hadn't been for my buddy, I wouldn't have been able to punish them," James went on to say. He remembered where his friend lived. All the way to the cottage community, the man prayed that William would stay living in the same place.
His best friend's eyes instantly filled with tears. As soon as the man opened the door, he hugged James so tightly that he almost broke his ribs. The man told William that everything that had happened to him was the work of his spouse.
"We're going to destroy them right now," William said firmly. "These two are not hiding at all. They even live in your house. That bastard didn't even keep mourning. Married this guy a month after the funeral. Wait, I was at the funeral. You were in the casket. I suggest we ask Betty where she found my corpse," James replied. "But not now. It's the only time we can do it. The sweet couple are flying to Italy tomorrow."
They've been put on the spot. They are unlikely to return to the country.
Those were the words William was saying as he changed out of his home clothes. It took William 2 phone calls to get riot police lined up around Betty and Liam's house.
Lawyers, investigators were already gathering documents and opening a case. But first, James wanted to talk to Betty himself. He wanted to see the full range of emotions that a woman who had done such an evil thing would feel with the man she had sworn to love. James knew his home very well. He understood how to get into it without attracting the attention of the guards. Without much difficulty, the man entered the cottage through the backyard.
Really packing? Going on vacation? James asked casually. His voice sounded like he was talking to old friends. He'd chosen that tone on purpose, though it wasn't easy for him to do so.
He wanted to do to this sweet couple what they had done to him. Liam tensed only at the fact that there was a stranger in the house. Once again, he didn't remember seeing him just a few days ago. Betty, on the other hand, recognized the voice immediately. She could hardly be distinguished from the statues that adorned the long hallways of the house. Betty. Usually people would answer questions. James continued to mock with his casual net of James. That's the way dialogue works. One asks, the other answers. It just can't be, the woman managed to squeeze out. I only have one question. James was completely oblivious to Betty's words. Where did you find a corpse that looks so much like me? No, I'm lying. I have a lot of questions for you, darling. Ah! Betty's legs trembled. Liam was getting visibly nervous. He started calling security. What, now? Not brave enough. James turned to Liam. I remember the last time you had the nerve to put your hands on me? Wrote on my head. You couldn't even finish the job. I will. You can be sure you'll pay for stealing almost 2 years of my life. Along with the guards, the police arrived at the house. Betty and Liam were tied up immediately. The guards looked at each other confused, but they were reassured by the head of the guard. He recognized his former master. How glad I am, the man said and hugged James. Working with these yards was simply impossible. I should fire you, James joked. You haven't done your job. At the interrogation, Liam showed his true colors. He immediately began to blame everything on Betty, saying that she made him do it and that he was going to divorce her. Betty turned out to be smarter than her lover. The woman realized there was no point in competing with James. She confessed everything honestly, only she added that Liam had suggested the idea to her. They left James in the woods because they were afraid to drive into town with a dead man in the trunk. They paid the morgue attendant to give them some homeless guy's corpse, and the makeup artist made him look indistinguishable from James. Funny thing is, I'm even buried as a hobo. James was trying to stay positive. He was really in a good mood. It's so nice to go home and punish the wrongdoers. The memory of Betty's frightened face and her trembling legs warmed James's soul for a long time. He only wished he had been able to mock his wife longer. He would have liked to give her as much suffering as possible, exactly as he had experienced so far his existence on the streets of a provincial town until she lived in the arms of her young lover. You were able to deal with all that in 2 days? Miranda marveled. You have no idea who my best friend is. James smiled. But I'll introduce you to him later. While the issue of re-registration of the company is being resolved, I'm waiting for the courts and other formalities. But the main thing is that I remember everything. And I can definitely say that I've never been happier than I am now, because I'm with you. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. Tell me if the baby's okay, and we'll bring you to the capital right away to a proper clinic. If only the doctor will let us. Miranda didn't yet realize how rich and powerful James was. Everything he told her about seemed untrue. She had never encountered such stories in her life. The girl couldn't believe the truth of what was happening exactly until she was actually put into a car that admired half the hospital. Are we going to your house? Miranda asked. Speech. She was still lethargic, either from shock or pain. First to the clinic, and then we'll definitely go to my place, James answered and covered his beloved's hand with his palm. Cindy looked after the already beggarly cottage of jeeps. Her face was almost green with envy, with anger. Behind her stood Lisa, who was cheering for Miranda as if she was the one being taken away by the billionaire right now. The nurse wanted to jump for joy, but even more she was happy that Miranda had gotten her nose rubbed in the face by those nasty ants who were bullying her. So much for the bum. The heat, Lisa's psyche. She didn't miss an opportunity to nip at Cindy Clara, who were shaking with anger. The women brushed off the nurses' pestering and retired to their nurses' quarters. And Lisa sighed dreamily. Well, just like in the movies. Can you imagine how interested our son will be to hear the story of our acquaintance? Miranda asked, cradling the little body that had just been born half an hour ago. This story will be passed on from generation to generation. James answered gently and stroked his son on the top of his head. I will tell it to our children
so that they will know how kind and compassionate their mom is. Miranda and James named their son Sam. He was the happiest baby in the world. And not because he lived in a huge cottage, but because he was surrounded by love. Miranda never returned to her hometown. She didn't even want to think about it. She felt sorry for the people who stayed there. Kelly, Lisa. Miranda missed them. And Noah never admitted that he knew about James's past. He'd asked him for help more than once, and James had gladly helped him.
Because he was grateful for the chance. Had it not been for the mercantile plans of the furniture factory owner, he would never have gotten his memory back. Did James change after the story that befell him? The man started a charity. He helped people who were homeless, took care of orphans. Before, the billionaire never thought about the lives of ordinary people. He tried not to remember what kind of person he used to be. Now he had a new and happy life. He wanted to share this kindness with others.